Remnant 2 holds a very special place in my heart. I've spent over 500 hours in the game, and I can't think of a time where I legitimately became bored or ran out of new things to do. The ability to mix and match your gear to approach a combat situation feels near infinite, and to some, that might be a blessing. To others, it might be an overwhelming amount of choice, akin to going to a fancy restaurant and just ordering chicken tenders and fries. But today, we will dive into more than just your go-to safe pick. I will be rating each and every amulet in the game. Now, it is important to note that I play strictly on Apocalypse, where proper amulet choice is absolutely vital for survival. I will be rating these amulets off of certain metrics, including, but not limited to, effectiveness in their respective category, whether for utility, offense, or defense, their flavor and uniqueness, and how they stack up against other amulets. Now, you may find that my opinions and experience with these pieces of equipment might not align with your opinions and experiences. This is because I am me, and you are you. Not to mention, Remnant 2 has a whopping 62 base game amulets and 12 DLC amulets, offering a total of 74 different amulets. And it's time I tell you which ones are great, and which ones are just, oh god, some of these are terrible. Starting in alphabetical order, we begin with the Abrasive Whetstone. Abrasive Whetstone is a phenomenal amulet, requiring you to have some bleeding synergies in order to gain its effect. It increases your crit chance by 15% and crit damage by 30% against the enemy that's bleeding. If you're using weapons that have innate bleed, such as Merciless, or you're using the Mutator Twisting Wounds, you're gonna have a good time. Running Ritualist with the Miasma skill will also give your enemies bleed, as can the Handler's Dog. This is a very easy choice to slot into any bleed build without thinking too much. Abrasive Whetstone is well deserving of our first A tier slot. Ankh of Power is another amulet that's easy to use without much thought. It grants a 15% increase to all damage, which, by the way, we can consider to be the baseline for all damage dealing amulets. Every time you use a relic, the bonus doubles to 30% for 15 seconds. All damage up's the absolute best way to increase overall DPS if you plan on using a mixture of ranged, melee, status effects, and companions. There aren't many ways to increase total damage by 30%, but the need to pop relics will prove cumbersome if you're someone like me who loves using passive healing. With that being said, this is still very much an amulet that can be used in any situation, so I slot it high in the B category. Birthright of the Lost is an amulet. Is it good? No. On perfect dodge, you apply Expose to the attacker for 10 seconds. Exposed targets will receive up to 24% additional all damage from all sources. This amount is reduced for each human ally alive, so if you're in a 3-man lobby, I believe the amulet works out to be 8% total extra damage. I find it unique to boost your teammates' damage as well as summons, but not good at all for an amulet. You have to perfectly dodge an enemy to activate the effect, and that isn't necessarily easy in this game, especially since you'll be making the first attack the majority of the time. The payoff is not worth it at all. We are already slotting our first amulet into the F tier. Brewmaster's Cork is absolutely nutty, increasing your max concoctions by 2 and granting you 2% damage reduction per concoction active. You can have a near max damage reduction with a light roll because of this amulet's synergies. Pair it with Feastmaster's Signet and Alchemist's Prime perk, and you can have a total of 7 concoctions, all lasting a few hours or more. This necklace is absolutely broken, and the only downside is that you're going to have to cough up some extra scrap to enable it, which is no big deal as each concoction you decide to drink is going to turn you into a god. This is an incredible amulet with extreme flexibility. Get your money up and drink. S tier. As an avid hardcore Apocalypse runner, I found out that Broken Pocket Watch is an absolutely incredible early game amulet. One of the biggest struggles with a new character is stamina management. There are going to be a lot of baddies on your tail, and it's hard to escape the likes of Abomination when you're constantly stamina starved. This amulet increases stamina regen by 25, and reduces stamina consumption by 50%, granting you more freedom than you previously had. Once you gain enough traits, you won't necessarily ever need to use this amulet again, but as an early game amulet, it's truly invaluable. Because of its drop off in the mid to late game, I will be slotting this in the B category, but just know, it truly is an S tier item for new characters. Butcher's Fetish is a lot like Abrasive Whetstone, but less about bleeding and more centric around melee builds. It increases melee crit chance by 15% and melee crit damage by 25% for 15 seconds, so long as you hit an enemy with a charge attack. This is a generally good item, and since melee can act as range with certain weapons such as World's Edge, it's even better than you might think at first glance. It's no S tier item by any means, but for builds that involve the juiciest hits possible like Wrathbringer and Atonement Folds, it's a solid B tier. Chains of Amplification increases all damage dealt to targets suffering from a status effect by 20%. It's a very tame amulet with a decent upside. It doesn't do anything innovative or crazy, and there's certainly better choices, so this will be a very quick high C tier. Cleansing Stone is a great amulet if you plan on trying to keep your teammates and summons alive. At its core, it reduces status effect damage on yourself by 50%, helping you avoid getting caught with your pants down against the likes of enemies such as Magister Duelian and the Fae. You can pair it with Medic and spam relic usage, cleansing yourself of status effects and granting your teammates 25% of your maximum health in a wide 20-meter radius. As a support amulet, it absolutely slaps, but it's near useless in single player. With little flexibility, I have to put this amulet in the low B tier. Core Booster increases weak spot damage by an absolutely nutty 50% for 10 seconds after killing an enemy. This is a no-brainer for those who can manage to hit weak spots while traversing the dangers of Remnant 2's biomes. This can also be extremely useful against bosses that summon adds, such as Talratha, Abomination, and Mother Mind. Because you must kill an enemy before it works, it can be a bit awkward to use as an all-around source of damage inside boss arenas. Outside of boss arenas, this amulet will supercharge your weapon indefinitely. I'll slot this into the B tier, but it truly feels like an S tier in the open field. Cost of Betrayal sounds like it should synergize with more items, but unfortunately it does not. Not a single other item in the game will have you actually benefit from only having one relic. It brings you down to one relic, and in exchange, it gives you a 20% damage up, which is barely over the average threshold. Then, if you decide to use the relic, you take an insane 20% extra damage for 30 seconds until the relic regenerates. Like, yeah, it synergizes with Blessed Ring, I guess, but come on, man, not really. This is a contender for the worst amulet in the game, but there's fierce competition for that spot. F tier. Daredevil's Charm is one of the hardest amulets to unlock, requiring you to defeat Root Earth in hardcore mode. Not many people have beaten the game in hardcore, so in turn, a lot of people won't see the amulet. But rest assured, you're not missing out on anything. If you decide to use it as intended, you will receive 30% to all damage dealt, and 12% extra movement speed, at a cost of taking 20% extra damage, and you can't wear armor! If you're a sweaty monster in Remnant 2, sure, go for it, but even then, it's not worth it at all to run around naked. A stray flame from an arrow would put you out of commission. Cheap hits can be frustrating enough, but feel even worse when you're trying to make something work that sounds like it could be enticing. I can't put it in an F tier because glass cannon builds exist, so it's going into D. Death's Embrace is a very good amulet if you plan on not being at full health, but if you plan on not being at full health, there's a lot better options. Below 100% health, you'll gain a solid 20% damage, and below 50% health, you'll gain haste. If you're committing to a 50% health build, I promise you there's already 2 amulets off the top of my head that will suit you much better. This is a niche amulet that you will accidentally not see work a lot of the time, simply because you will be at full health. With that being said, when used with Ring of Omens, you'll gain the Misty Blink dodge, and every time you dodge, you'll lose health, proccing Death's Embrace. This interaction works better with the other Yaesha amulets, such as Full Moon Circlet. It's not good. D tier. Death-Soaked Idol looks better than it actually is, at least for solo players. It suffers from the same issue a lot of amulets do in solo play, requiring multiple enemies to be in the vicinity to see a real difference in your damage. It pairs nicely with Ritualist's ability to nuke the map, but in most cases, those poor folks are already nuked, and Death-Soaked Idol isn't going to be the reason they're gone. Solo bosses are going to have their way with you, and larger elites won't be feeling the extra damage once the smaller adds are eviscerated. However, if you're playing in multiplayer, this amulet becomes much better, as you and your allies can consistently have Bleeding with Atonement Fold. This is a C tier amulet with much higher potential if you have friends, unlike me. Decayed Margin is a unique amulet, and I can always appreciate equipment like this. Your melee hits gain a base of 1.5% lifesteal, and every 25% health you're missing, you'll gain an additional 1.5% lifesteal, maxing out at 6% total lifesteal. If your health is full, you'll gain 25% melee damage. This amulet misses the mark because you're missing out on a whole lot of damage just to sustain your health, when there are many other pieces of equipment that do that, like Dying Ember, which gives you a straight up 6% melee lifesteal. If an amulet is on the same power level as a ring, it's not a good amulet. If you combine the two, yes, your lifesteal will be insane, I just don't think it's necessary. Decayed Margin is one of the worst melee options in a slot that is extremely competitive when it comes to melee. D tier. Detonation Trigger is a blast to use. It increases explosion damage by a real nice 25%, and it causes explosions to burn the enemy. For weapons like Corrupted Meridian, it simply adds to the chaos you're already ensuing. If you're using weapon mods such as Space Crabs and the Mutator Kill Switch, you're gonna have a good time watching everything explode and burn. This amulet can do absolute work, as explosive builds have always been good in this game, and frankly any game. Use this amulet and watch it drop into the A tier. Difference Engine is often overlooked, but this is not an amulet to sleep on. When you have a shield active, you gain 20% to all damage and an extra 1.5% lifesteal. Use in tandem with rings such as Tightly Wound Coil or Rerouting Cable, and you've got a shield consistently up, assuring your damage is improved and your health will be regenerated, albeit not as quickly as the lifesteal might lead you to believe. The ability to be protected by your shield while also being able to replenish health is not something to be slept on, and it proves to be a good choice. B tier. At a base, Downward Spiral grants you 10% increased fire rate and 50% melee attack speed. With a 50% health build, you'll also have a permanent 15% rage damage and a 20% melee damage increase. This is a personal favorite of mine that I use with heavy-hitting melee builds in tandem with Ring of Crisis, which will always proc so long as you regain the 25% health threshold. The insanity of swinging around a giant hammer or turret at Mach speed while hitting thousands of damage per swing is something you do not want to miss out on. With proper traits and equipment, you can certainly still stay alive, but the only thing holding this back from the S tier is the high price you must pay to cut your health in half. This is an easy A tier. I'll be the first to say that I have not dipped my toes into Grey Health builds. Gunfire Games really wants us to use Grey Health builds, but after finding out that Bitter Memento was nuking people's save files, I've stayed away entirely. This assessment might not be as accurate as others, but here we go. Effigy Pendant grants 15% to all damage dealt, 10% damage reduction, and 1 additional hit before Grey Health is removed. You must have Grey Health present for this interaction to work. If this worked with Ring of Omens, I could see this being pretty decent, but as it stands, setting up Grey Health builds takes a bit of work, requiring you to either take damage, using certain burden rings to give yourself Grey Health, etc. The payoff is not very good, as the damage increase and damage reduction are decent at best. D tier. Effluvium Enhancer increases acid damage by 20% and corrosive damage by 50%. Any corrosive damage over time builds will, no pun intended, melt enemies with this amulet. Using this in tandem with items like Nebula, Corrosive Rounds, Tainted Blade, and Fetid Wounds will decimate your enemy. I personally think that this is the best in comparison to its counterparts, but they're all most likely going to get an extremely similar grade. We got ourselves a high A tier here. Okay, I can see how Emergency Switch could be decent early game, like early game, when you only have 3 relics instead of up to 10, but man, no, come on. There's like an incredible amount of options when it comes to healing, and this is by far the worst. When below 50% health, you have a 35% less chance to consume your relic, and if you're down to 1 relic, it can be used for free every 60 seconds. Please use other equipment to stay alive. F tier. Energized Neck Coil is a strange amulet because it's never worked as intended. It either never procced as it should, or procced every bullet and destroyed everything you looked at for over 5 milliseconds. I can't tier list this amulet until I finally see how it was intended to be used when it's patched. Energy Diverter can be good when used in similar builds that Difference Engine uses. The only difference is...
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
...is that Energy Diverter grants 5% less damage and replaces the lifesteal with a 10% extra crit chance. Not much to say that I haven't already said, but you might miss the lifesteal. This will go right below Difference Engine in the B tier. Escalation Protocol sees one of the higher all damage benefits at 25% total, but it requires you to kill 10 enemies, increasing in increments of 2.5%. Dealing damage will keep the timer alive, which lasts 10 seconds. This is okay for damage over time builds, and builds where you plan on speeding through the level because it's gonna hurt when you aren't able to deal damage after 10 seconds. This is fine to use throughout the realms, but absolutely terrible in boss fights. Plenty of amulets do what this does, but way better. This one's going into the D tier. Hey, you should like and subscribe, please, thanks, love you. Full Moon Circlet offers a 20% increase in damage when your health is full, and a static 3% range lifesteal. This amulet also works with Ring of Omens for Misty Step. This combo works well because you can gain your health back by shooting the enemy after you lose the health to a Misty Step dodge. This is a great overall amulet for a mix of survivability and damage, regardless of whether or not you use Ring of Omens. B tier. Gift of Euphoria can grant a whopping 25% critical chance so long as you maintain your usage of stamina, as it requires 25 stamina to be spent to add a stack. If your stamina pool and stamina recovery are high, you're going to find yourself consistently proccing this extra crit chance, becoming an absolute powerhouse. This is a C tier amulet, missing out on higher tiers because of how different fights end up working out, and it might not have you so cognizant of purposely wasting your stamina. Gift of Melancholy is a tall order. If you're not at 100% stamina, you must get back to 100% stamina and maintain it for 7 seconds to reactivate Gift of Melancholy. It grants you 25% increase in all damage, which is extremely substantial. It will immediately disappear once you break the threshold, so this amulet is awful without the proper build. In tandem with Bisected Ring, which grants unlimited stamina, it becomes beastly. It works in any build, but my personal favorite is the Flail Blender build, since the charge attack goes until you're interrupted out of it. You could even take a ranged approach and just reap the benefits from afar. It is so damn good, and I want to put it in S tier, I truly do, but Bisected Ring makes you take 15% extra damage, and if you're not prepared for that, you're gonna die when you think you're safe. High A tier, as much as it pains me. Gift of the Unbound is the silliest thing I've ever seen in this game. This disables negative effects of burden rings and restricts maximum health gain by 20% per effect disabled. The downsides of burden rings aren't bad to begin with, especially if you plan your build around them. So why in the world is this amulet punishing us for using the burden rings?
What the fuck?
In my opinion, the only time this amulet will ever become useful is if and when they rework it, to grant you benefits based off of disabling burdens. Maybe it increases base health by 15 per burden ring, so you can mix and match some shield synergies to compensate for the health it takes away. Or maybe it increases all damage by 5% per burden ring, or something, I don't know. Just spitballing here really, because this is an F tier piece of equipment. Golden Ribbon is a phenomenal mod-centric amulet. It increases mod damage by a flat 25%, and activating a mod grants haste for 15 seconds. Haste speeds up every single action you make, such as reload speed, movement speed, fire rate, melee speed, etc. by 7%. In mod spam builds, you will absolutely have haste up the entire time, and it's an incredible benefit to the player. There are so many amazing mods that are going to love that damage up as well. This is an easy A tier amulet. Gunslinger's Charm increases fire rate by 15% and reload speed by 20%. It's certainly an item intended for early game use and can find use in certain builds, but in the end it's not a very good choice. The fire rate increase is decent at best, and rings like Outcast Ring are even better at maintaining a quick reload while only taking up a ring slot. D tier. If you've been to the back rooms, you may have found the Gunfire security lanyard. This amulet automatically refills your magazine over time, and it doesn't work for single-shot weapons. It's a fun amulet to use, but it certainly isn't aiming to be the best, as the automatic refill isn't very quick. I could see some fun shenanigans in tandem with the Bandit Mutator and Provisioner's Ring, but it seems like more of a fun amulet than a competitive one. Provisioner's Ring does plenty of work by itself in this department anyway. Another D tier amulet onto the board. Hallowed Egg is an amulet I've never seen anyone use. If you spend at least 30% of your gun's magazine, melee damage increases by 10% for 7 seconds, up to 5 stacks. This is also one of the only items in the game that has the stacks decay one by one, making it extremely easy to keep active. Using this in any melee build with a single shot weapon is ideal, and if it is used with Twisted Arbalist, it'll give you all 5 stacks instantly. There is no other 50% damage amulet in the game aside from the likes of Sinister Totem. This amulet is so unique, and so powerful. This is a high A tier with the right equipment in a melee build. Hyperconductor increases your skill cooldowns by 50% and reduces your mod power regeneration by 15%, but in exchange, you can gain double skill charges. It also doubles heavy weapon ammo, which I think is wasteful and useless considering using a relic with the Engineer class gives you your ammo back anyway. This is my favorite amulet to use in tandem with Explorer when I'm just trying to rush through areas to reach bosses. You can imagine how good this is with any strong skill though. You could chain Challenger's Berserk and Gunslinger's Bulletstorm as much as you'd like to burst a boss, but it has to be in the right situation, as you'll certainly feel it when your charges are on cooldown. There are a lot of efficient synergies to go along with this amulet, and it can be a load of fun to use, so I'm putting it in the B tier. Index of the Scribe is incredibly powerful, increasing mod and skill weak spot damage by 35%. There aren't a ton of mods and skills that this applies to, but with the right build, you can do some serious damage. For instance, Enigma can really devastate the opposition. This amulet is a blast, and it slaps. Not much else to say. A tier. Indignant Fetish is a unique amulet. After taking damage from an enemy, all of your damage is increased by 25%, and all incoming damage is reduced by 10% for 20 seconds. It's a different take on the most powerful equipment slot, requiring you to take damage first to feel benefits. Depending on your build, setup might not be worth it. However, with a build that expects to take some damage, this amulet shines. Amulets are typically efficient in their own respective category, like DPS or defense, and this one happens to tick both of those boxes. 25% damage is really, really good, and 10% damage reduction is good as well. It would pair extremely well with any sort of high health regen and armored builds. When all cylinders are firing, this is easily an A tier amulet. Inert Overcharger requires you to stand still, increasing your fire rate by 20%, reload speed by 15%, and reduces recoil by 50%. This lasts 1.5 seconds after you move, and it usually takes about 1 second or so to kick back in, allowing you to dodge attacks without missing too much uptime. You can make endless amounts of silly high fire rate builds that work from great distances while roaming around Remnant 2, but as you can imagine, this is not meta. At the end of the day, Remnant is a game revolving around movement. If you have friends that can keep the boss distracted, go hide in the corner with an Inert Overcharger and your favorite machine gun. Otherwise, you better keep your feet moving. C tier. Insulation Driver is a phenomenal amulet. If you work around having Bulwark active, which is very easy to do, you'll be granted 15% extra all damage as well as haste. 15% extra damage is baseline statistically, but the benefits of haste are truly too powerful to pass up. If you don't plan on equipping Anastasia's Inspiration, you should consider using Insulation Driver. Encouraging the use of Bulwark, which is the best defensive tool in the game, along with granting haste will really open up the game for players, which is exactly why I put it in the A tier. Jester's Belt wants you to use your mods, increasing cast speed by 35% and subsequently increasing all damage by 20% for 15 seconds. This opinion is not controversial by any means, but mod cast speed is kinda lame. Yeah, some mods are pretty doo-doo without it since they take so damn long to cast, but there's a trait for that. If you already planned on a mod-focused build, there's a good chance you're running Arcan, which is already increasing your cast speed by 50%. If that wasn't enough, you could just spec 10 trait points into it and call it a day. I love the flavor, I love watching the Jester dance every single time I load into Beatific Palace, but his moves are not enough to save the rating. High C tier. Were you planning on making a shield build? How about a mod build? What if you wanted to do both? Kinetic Shield Exchanger is here for you, because it will grant you 25% mod damage and generate 15% extra mod power, so long as you have a shield up. Proccing a shield is extremely easy, I just don't see why you'd want to spec into both shield and mods and then end up picking this amulet. The problem with mod builds is how competitive that space is for your equipment. There are so many amulets that require a lot less setup, and even in comparison to Jester's Bell, that 5% extra damage isn't going to make that much of a difference. The biggest issue is you have to have the shield active, and once the shield is not active, the bonus is gone. This is much harder to work around than a timed buff. If you have confidence in your ability to move around the battlefield without getting hit, and sustaining your shield with tightly wound coil or rerouting cable, go for it. There's better options to have more consistent outcomes. C tier. In a situation of panic, Curry Charm will come to your aid, increasing relic use speed by up to 50% and granting you up to a 35% chance not to consume a relic charge. If you find yourself often getting destroyed by your enemies, having this as an emergency isn't bad at all. It's your amulet slot, you know? If you find yourself dying because you're out of relics or not using them fast enough, I wholeheartedly think that coming up with a different combat approach is the better choice. What I mean by that is speccing into damage reduction, passive healing, maneuverability, or utility would serve the player better. When it comes to relics and amulet synergies, this isn't even one of the better ones. It certainly clears the dog shit that is emergency switch, but just because that shit smells worse than this shit, doesn't mean this shit don't stank. D tier.
Greetings and saturations, traveler. While I have you here.
If you love talking to Mudtooth, then I've got the perfect amulet for you. After speaking to the Lemire after you've saved him, you'll find out he has about 12,560,000 dialogue lines for you. Once you've exhausted all these dialogue lines, you'll want to take a nap. Once you wake up from your nap, you'll realize that Mudtooth's cousin actually left you a really good amulet. Lemire's sensor increases mod duration by an insane 50%, with the slight downside of mod cost increasing by 15%. You could probably imagine that with the right build, you could about double the uptime with your mods. For instance, Familiar is really good, but takes a second. What the fuck? Familiar is really good, but takes a second to find an enemy to lock onto, especially when finding new targets, and it only lasts 15 seconds. If you double that time, your Familiar is going to tear everybody's cheeks. This goes for any elemental mods, AoE mods, etc. Equip Lemire's sensor, equip your favorite mods, and go have fun being a powerhouse. A tier. Legacy Protocol is one of the best enablers for skill builds. You can stack skill duration in many ways, and the fact that this amulet can add an extra 15% while also decreasing cooldown times by 20% is ridiculously powerful. There isn't much to say about the simple and effective amulet. Try it out with your favorite skills with Stone of Continuance and Skill Relic Fragments. This works great with any playstyle, offense or defense. I personally loved using it in my reboot and gold digging build. I put this amulet high in the A tier. Leto's amulet coupled with Dull Steel Ring and 5 points in strong back will allow a light roll in full Leto Mark 1. With full Fortify and Mythic armor, you'll be nearly 60% armor damage reduction with not too much commitment. On top of that, stamina costs are reduced by 30%, allowing for more panic rolling and melee swinging if you desire. If you only use Leto's amulet, full strong back, and Fortify, you'll have a 51.3% armor damage reduction. This will be similarly graded to an amulet down the road, Twisted Idol, because they do nearly the same thing. This is a completely fine and effective amulet at any point in the game, well deserving of a B. Matriarch's Insignia is the easiest S tier for any melee build. You don't have to think about it. Seriously, stop thinking. Turn your brain off, swing weapon, win. It grants 35% increased melee damage, and melee attacks will restore your stamina. This is an auto-include. Navigator's Pendant is a general all stats up, granting 25 health, 25 stamina, and minus 10 armor encumbrance, translating into a slight increase in damage reduction for your preference in weighted roll. When you have wacky equipment, you need baseline equipment like this. This is a serviceable amulet if you don't have a direction in your build. It's boring, yeah, but an additional item to stack extra health can be extremely beneficial with shields, concoctions like Dark Cider, and fragments like Mythic Health. Not bad. C tier. Neckbone Necklace reduces the damage of status effects on the wearer by 50%, but while you're suffering from a status effect, you'll also be granted 25% increase in all damage. When it came to items that required you to be under the influence of a status effect in the base game, it was evident that it kinda sucked balls. With the release of Atonement Fold, new life has been breathed into this niche group. Using this one ring slot will grant you a permanent Neckbone Necklace proc, along with the increased crit chance. Waiting for an enemy to blast you with status effects is even harder than just purposely taking damage from an enemy, so yeah, the Atonement Fold must be included. With that being said, if you need an easy way to deal an extra 25% damage without any thought, here's what you want to do. Taking less damage from status effects is nice, but again, very niche and not for general use. High B tier feels nice here. Necklace of Flowing Life is another Ring of Omens enabler, which is always important to keep in mind for those Blinky boys out there. Necklace of Flowing Life increases Grey Health conversion by an additional 100%. When Grey Health conversion triggers, you can 5x the amount as mod power. If you convert 10 Grey Health to regular health, by these calculations, you'll gain 50 mod power. This probably works very well with Dense Silicone Ring if you want to lean into the mod regen aspect of it, especially since your dodges will create Grey Health and heal your character back up. When used in tandem with the various Grey Health synergies Remnant 2 offers, such as Medic being able to take more Grey Health hits, Sacred Lake Water, etc., you'll find yourself managing quite a few resources at the same time. Here's Pseudo Plays to show us the power of Necklace of Flowing Life.
Let's swap over to this real quick. We got another cube ready to go. Launch it out there. Dodge away from that dude. So this is a weakness of the build, right?
The problem with creating gray health is, as you whittle your own health down, you realize that you're playing Remnant 2, and things that aren't you also want to kill you. I'm not a fan of this gray health baloney. I don't know how to rate this amulet, so I send it to the Shadow Realm of D tier. I used to think Necklace of Supremacy truly was supreme, and now I think it's okay. If you haven't been damaged in the last 7 seconds, you gain a 15% all damage increase, and if you're at full health, it increases to 25%. For those who are great at dodging and can stay out of the way of the enemy, this necklace is great. At the end of the day, it is a real punch to the gut to lose your necklace buff when a stray bullet or enemy tail hits you. I also feel that having a piece of equipment go inactive when it's your best piece of equipment is damaging to the human psyche, putting you in a panic state because you aren't ready to deal maximum damage. Some people call it panic rolling, but I call it anxiety. It's a fine amulet for the sweats, but if you don't necessarily have game mastery yet, there's better options. C tier. Once you've defeated every world boss and progression side boss, you can purchase Nightmare Spiral. It grants an insane 10% lifesteal for range damage, but it reduces healing effectiveness by 95%. This amulet is not used by the majority of players, not only because of how difficult it is to obtain, but how good you must be at the game to properly use it. From a skill perspective, you must be able to take a hit and trust in your ability to regain your health by doing what you were doing before, knowing that another hit could be your demise. From a me perspective, why the fuck would I use this? Now, I mainly use Tranquil Heart, and paired with Regrowth, General Lifesteal, Triage, etc., I do quite literally nothing to get a substantial, stable, and quick health regeneration during fights. What would disabling that do? Open up some trait points? Make relics absolutely useless? I think if this necklace also granted some extra damage, it could be somewhat viable. As a late game gift, I simply cannot see how this could be used and considered powerful, since you will already have a plethora of ways to heal up without sacrificing the necklace slot. I'm sorry to all of those that like this amulet, but this nightmare just spiraled its way to the F tier. So let's wash out that dirty taste in your mouth with the polar opposite, an S tier amulet. Now, this amulet was not S tier in the base game. Now that Atonement Fold is out, Nightweaver's Grudge is arguably the best amulet in Remnant 2. I don't make the rules, this is just how it is now. When used in tandem with Atonement Fold for a permanent proc, Nightweaver's Grudge will not only be granting 30% critical chance in total, with 20% being from the amulet, but it will also grant you haste. Holy fucking balls, that is strong. That is almost too strong. I don't think they had Atonement Fold in mind when they created this amulet. Without Atonement Fold, the build would require you to have some sort of way to inflict status effects on your opponents. You would also have to be within 15 meters of the inflicted enemy for it to work. Now, you could just slap Momentum on a Monarch with all of your equipment on and do unlimited crits without even looking at the boss. You could roleplay as a sniper who one-shots everything without them noticing. You could do whatever your little heart desires. Nightweaver's Grudge is truly incredible. S+ tier. Nimwe's Ribbon is a bit of a pain to acquire, but you'll be rewarded with a very powerful gift that increases relic healing effectiveness by 50%. If you activate your relic, you'll be granted haste for 25 seconds. This kind of blows equipment like Emergency Switch out of the water by not only making each relic you use insanely efficient, but also making your character faster in response. This feels more like an Emergency Switch than Emergency Switch. This is in the upper echelon of healing equipment. I still don't personally think that healing amulets are worth the slot though. That being said, you must accept that I'm putting it in the B tier. The One True King Sigil increases mod damage by 20%, and enhances the effect of Faerun Sigil and Phelan Sigil by 50% per sigil equipped, up to 100%. To acquire all these items would be to run through Beatific Palace several times, and the payoff is poop, from a butt. To equip both sigils would be to commit to a ranged melee mod hybrid build, which in and of itself already sounds a bit overwhelming. It's even more so overwhelming when you realize you only have 2 more ring slots and haven't done fuck all for your build. Jester's build does a better job at working its way into a hybrid build hilariously enough, since it's based around all damage, and you get that as soon as you get the Quill. One True King Sigil is already getting outclassed by other mod damage or all damage amulets, and I don't think anyone's going to benefit from a 20% mod power increase from melee damage when there is literally a trait that can increase it by 50%. I have to be harsh with this one. The payoff for finally getting every piece of the build together is, well, non-existent. I see no reason in using this. There are so many better choices that are more flexible. F tier. Onyx Pendulum is definitely different. It claims that firearm damage adds stacks, which increase the damage of your stowed firearm by 2.5% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. I say claims because you'd think that dealing any damage would tick it up instantly, but no, as I tragically dumped this full clip into a dummy to get only a few stacks. The nice part about this necklace, however, is once you get it going, it slaps. This is best used for long, drawn-out boss fights, as you can easily get both weapons going, proccing a permanent 25% firearm buff. If you can keep your ammo reserve stocked, you could lay down some serious firepower. Unfortunately, it takes quite a bit of time to get going, and the payout's going to be short-lived once it finally arrives, since everything will be dead by then. This is a C-tier item. The One-Eyed Joker idol is a hilarious concept that sounds fun in theory. Neutral backdashing will create a magic card that lasts a whopping 1 second, and if the card absorbs enemy damage, you'll gain 25% critical chance for 5 seconds. Neutral backdashes will unfortunately cost an additional 30% stamina during the shenanigans, however. You could go Bisected Ring for unlimited stamina and end up like me, tragically trying to spam Joker cards as I backdash into my own death. In all seriousness, this is not a competitive amulet, and the 5 seconds of extra crit chance feel like such a minor win when you're burning stamina and playing drastically different than you normally would. It misses F tier because the Joker guy is silly, and cool shit is important to have in games like this. D tier. Participation Medal is S tier for the memes. It increases health by 10, stamina by 10, movement speed by 10%, and damage reduction by 10%. Not much to say other than Ben Keratin is a savage, and you guys need to get good. This is a solid all-stats upgrade and can be slotted in any build for increased overall survivability. This amulet ranks in the B tier. You know what I'm not a big fan of? Amulets that need you to kill 10 enemies to get the most out of them. It's a little overkill and renders the amulet useless in any boss encounter. You know what I am a fan of? Amulets that take the concept of ramping and use it like rangefinder. After you kill an enemy, you gain 10% range damage and an extra 2 meters to your firearm's ranges. This can stack 3 times for a total of 30% extra damage and 6 extra meters. These stacks will last 10 seconds, but the best part is that ranged weak spot hits will refresh the duration of those stacks. Once you've killed 3 enemies, you can ultimately keep it up so long as you can hit a boss in its weak spot. I love that there's a lot of depth to this when thinking about when to use it. It's efficient through any biome, and good against bosses like Mother Mind and Astropath, and great against bosses like Custodian's Eye and Shrewd. The firearms range is nothing to be slept on, as 6 meters can go pretty damn far on shotguns, automatic weapons, and rifles alike. I don't think many amulets on this list will make you feel as satisfied as Rangefinder when you can finally hit a stride with it. It is so good at what it does, and it's perfectly unique. Not to mention, if this works with the orbs in the Annihilation fight, you could pretty much instantly proc it and have it up the entire time. This amulet is well deserving of the S tier. Ravager's Mark is another amulet that procs Ring of Omens, and it increases all damage dealt to bleeding targets by 20%. If the target's below 50% health, the bonus increases to 30%. This amulet is great and an easy include in any build that uses bleed synergies. Since they're so common in today's Remnant with the amazing new class Ritualist and Twisting Wounds, Ravager's Mark is very flexible. There's not much to say other than 20% all damage is baseline great, 30% all damage is upper echelon. I also think the theme is perfect for the Ravager. Just remember, not everything can bleed, and your enemies must be bleeding first for it to do anything. Easy A tier. The Red Doe Sigil is yet another amulet that procs Ring of Omens, and it increases relic healing effectiveness by 30%, which doubles to 60% when the wearer's health is below 50%. Remember Nimwe's ribbon? Yeah, so think about that. Now think about this. This one is ultimately much worse, as that relic healing from 50 to 100% HP is going to be 20% less, so you'll feel that, and the extra 10% on the 0 to 50% HP doesn't justify not having haste. It's just worse. I really don't feel like this is worth an amulet slot at all. I won't give it an F, but I'm going to give it the D. Remember Navigator's Pendant? What if we moved the numbers around a little? Will you wear me now? I love amulets like Samaflange because they inspire you to expand into different playstyles. This amulet makes it so direct damage taken from enemies, plus any additional damage within 2 seconds, is reduced by an insane 60%. Once the defensive buff expires, all incoming damage to the wearer is increased by 15% for 10 seconds. I can already think of a few builds of this would benefit, like any skill with Invader or any build revolving around movement. You could have Wormhole and stay in the fight until you get hit, having enough time to separate yourself from the enemy, allowing the 10-second timer to run out while you have the distance to attack the enemy as they try to catch up to you. I think that in theory it sounds a lot better than it ends up performing, but you gotta love the creativity of this one. I think it's great at what it's trying to do. High B tier. Scavenger's Bauble is S tier because it increases scrap pickups by 50% and you use it when you want more money. It also automatically picks up any nearby crafting materials so you don't have to physically do it yourself. Early game economy is rough since everything requires scrap, so if you find this in your travels, you're gonna be pretty happy. Not much else to say. Shade Bloom Crystal is yet another standout in terms of creativity. This amulet grants a 30% damage bonus, which changes from physical to elemental every 5 seconds. 30% is certainly in the upper echelon, and there are a few combos that make this fairly simple to use. It can excel in short to mid-range combat in tandem with whatever primary you choose, along with Enigma or Nebula. Along with this, damage over time effects will be considered elemental and increase along with the bonuses. This amulet calls for a lot of chaos and rewards the player well for leaning into it. It's not game-breaking by any means, but it slaps pretty hard with the right setup, and it's plenty of fun to use. B tier. Shock Device increases shock damage by 20% and overloaded damage by 50%. Just like its other elemental counterparts, it works really well in its respective build. Enigma's gonna love it, as well as Krell's Axe, Havoc Form, etc. I think that Overloaded is the weakest damage over time, leading me to drop this away from its brothers into the B tier. Silver Ribbon is a lot like Golden Ribbon, but for skills. I share the same sentiments that I share with Golden Ribbon with this item. Skills are more difficult to proc in comparison to mods, but I think there's plenty of skill combinations to proc haste permanently while also taking advantage of the extra damage. Ideally, those skills are going to have multiple charges, such as Challenger's Stomp. Why don't I also give Silver Ribbon an A? Soul Anchor fits into the theme of a summoner, increasing all damage dealt by 20% for 30 seconds. This is incredibly easy to keep procced, as you can rely on summons like Space Crabs to maintain the buff indefinitely. It's an easy slot for any summoner build if you're looking for an above-average damage-dealing amulet. It's nothing crazy, but it's deserving of a B tier. I once made my most proud build centered around Spirit Wisp Amulet and the ability to spam Monarch's mod, reducing skill cooldowns by nearly 70% if done right. That is no longer possible, and rightfully so. Now that you can only use this normally, I'm here to tell you, it's pretty good. With this amulet, activating a mod reduces current skill cooldowns by 3% for every 300 mod power spent. Using this in tandem with, say, Stone of Malevolence will allow you to get your skills back much quicker with the right arsenal. It works wonders in skill-based builds, that is, if your build is also mod-based. Basically, this amulet isn't exactly easy to build around. It's still full of flavor and stands unique among its peers, so that's awesome. High C tier. Stalker's Brand grants the user 10% range damage and 15% melee damage at a base. If you lean into a stealthy approach, the bonus doubles. At 20 and 30% respectively, these numbers are pretty good, but not mind-blowing. There are few ways to stay stealthy in this game, and even fewer ways in solo. This includes the Hunter's stealth mechanics, the ability to distract with summons, Invader, etc. The bonuses aren't enough to justify using this in a stealth build, even if everything did go right. I'm not sure what changes would be needed for this to become more viable, but it's more of a role-playing amulet than a useful one. D tier. Talisman of the Sun certainly shines among its peers. Just like every other amulet in this category, it increases fire damage by 20% and burning damage by 50%. Fire is one of the stronger afflictions in the game, and this is going to help lean into a fire-centric build. There's not much to say, of course, but it's well deserving of an A tier. Toxic Release Valve was the first piece of equipment to inspire me to create a challenge video. Not only was this piece of equipment important to me, but it's integral to a game that prides itself on build diversity. With this amulet, every few seconds you could swap weapons to create a toxic cloud of gas within a 7-meter radius, damaging all nearby enemies. Not only is this amulet actually efficient in killing, but you could beat the game by farming. Better yet, throw on Kill Switch too for double the fun, and make sure to increase your radius for both with Amplitude. This amulet is a beautiful boy, well deserving of an S tier. Twisted Idol is an effective defensive amulet, which increases armor effectiveness by 35% and reduces encumbrance by 15%. With Strong Back maxed, Twisted Idol, Elevated Ring, Fey Protector Signet, and Dull Steel Ring, you'll have a light roll in Full Idol Mark 1. With Full Fortify and Mythic Armor Fragment, that will grant you 64.4% DR. Because armor damage reduction has diminishing returns in regards to total damage reduction, you'll find even better that you can achieve that light roll with 53.5% damage reduction for armor with only Strong Back, Fortify, and Twisted Idol, using a mashup of armor. This allows for an extremely reliable source of damage reduction with very little commitment. In my opinion, there are more efficient ways to micromanage your armor, as you can see in comparison with Dull Steel Ring to free up your amulet slot without much difference, but this is fine. This is a B tier. Vengeance Idol is a personal favorite of mine. This amulet increases all damage dealt by a staggering 30% when the wearer's health is below 50%, which can be permanently achieved, of course, with a restriction cord. Some of my favorite builds involve those items, along with Ring of Crisis and Hardened Coil, complementing a huge damage increase by skyrocketing the user's survivability. 30% damage is in the upper echelon, and since it's all damage, a lot of builds are going to work nicely here. It is flexible, and it is dangerous. A tier. If you like never running out of ammo while simultaneously shooting more often, then Void Idol is going to be your best friend. Not only does it increase reload speed by 20%, but reloads only require 50% of the magazine from your reserves. In other words, if I reload my double-barrel shotgun, it's only going to cost me 1 shell instead of 2. In the early game, this would be a great piece of equipment, but you can only get it with Hardened Iron. That means that this piece of equipment cannot be used early game, which hurts its overall effectiveness. If you find yourself constantly running out of ammo and don't want to dump trait points or relic fragments into ammo reserves, or scrap into ammo boxes, this would be a nice choice, but there are a lot better options in the market to supplement this issue. Because it is unique, I will put Void Idol into the C tier. It's certainly not unusable, and it's actually quite decent if you're using weaponry that burns through ammo reserves that have a low base amount, like Bolt Driver. Weightless Weight is a silly amulet, which increases movement speed by 0.75% and reduces stamina cost of all actions by 0.75% for every 5 points in armor encumbrance. So, at each weight bracket breakpoint, you're getting 3.75% at light, 7.5% at medium, 11.25% at heavy, etc. The highest weight achievable, which is 145 with Meteorite Shard, would grant 21.75% increase. This will not reduce the stamina cost enough to supplement for the silliness of ultra heavyweight's penalties, and the amulet does next to nothing if you aren't trying to peak your weight. Compare this to Participation Medal, where all you have to do is die a few times on Apocalypse to a boss to get it. This is great for the memes, but bad for player use. F tier. Sinister Totem is easily one of the best amulets in the game, especially with how powerful Ritualist is. Applying or refreshing a negative status effect to an enemy increases status damage by 1% for 15 seconds. You can have a maximum of 50 stacks, or 50% status effect damage. Damage over time is an effective way to destroy quite literally anything in the game, embarrassing bosses even if they have elemental resist. Using this in conjunction with the Miasma AoE skill from Ritualist, along with any elemental mod and weapon, is going to keep Sinister Totem procced essentially forever. A well-curated build will turn Apocalypse into a cakewalk. S tier. And last but certainly not least, Whispering Marble is another top-tier amulet, granting you 3 stacks of Bulwark and increasing all damage by 3% per stack of Bulwark. At a base, 3 stacks of Bulwark equates to 18% damage reduction, which is already ridiculously high. Using this in tandem with Dried Clavering will grant another stack of Bulwark, plus additional all damage, equivalent to 60% of the total damage reduction granted by Bulwark stacks. This equates to an additional 15% all damage at max stacks. The only issue is, you'll have to find another way to get the final Bulwark stack to get the full benefit from the amulet and ring combo. You could do this with the Challenger's Relic perk, Juggernaut skill, or by equipping another Bulwark ring. This was made awkward on purpose, of course, because these items are so very powerful. At the end of the day, it's a high A tier amulet, and it's well worth your time to find and use. Well, here's the tier list. People definitely aren't going to shit on this in the comments.